May I sleep in your cabin, sir? It's freezing outside, the Chinese woman begged the lone rancher. Caleb Harlow had lived alone for so long that silence felt like a familiar companion. He had grown used to the soft creak of the old wooden ranch house, the distant call of cattle, and the whisper of wind moving across the wide fields. His ranch sat far out in the quiet part of Wyoming, where neighbors were miles apart, and the sky felt stretched tight across the world like a blue blanket during the day and a star-filled ocean at night. People sometimes said they could never live that far from town, but Caleb felt at home in the stillness. Most days it gave him comfort, but winter in that part of the country was something a person never truly got used to. Each year it came with its own moods, some gentle, some fierce. On this particular afternoon, as Caleb rode toward home on his horse, he could feel a storm gathering behind him. The air was sharp, almost metallic, and the sky had been clear only an hour earlier. Now thick gray clouds rolled in fast, as if pushed by invisible hands. He tugged the collar of his coat higher and clicked his tongue to urge the horse forward. This was no ordinary weather change. Anyone who lived in that land long enough learned to read the signs. When the wind went from cold to biting, when the clouds dropped so low they seemed to skim the tops of the hills, and when the quiet became too quiet, it meant trouble was close. Caleb needed to reach the cabin before the storm reached him. He leaned forward a little, shielding his face from the sudden sprays of snow that began to fall. The flakes were small at first, but they multiplied quickly, swirling and spinning as if they were alive. The temperature also dropped in only minutes, turning the world harsh and white. Even the horse snorted nervously, feeling the change. "Easy now," Caleb murmured, patting the animal's neck. His voice came out in a thin cloud. "We'll be home soon." He kept his eyes fixed on the faint path that led across his land. He knew every corner of the ranch by heart, even when the ground disappeared under snow. But as the storm thickened, visibility shrank fast. The familiar hills blurred. The fence line that marked the boundary of the property became only a dark smudge in the white haze. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. This storm was arriving faster than he had expected. He guided the horse carefully, trusting instinct and memory more than sight. His cabin wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes away under normal weather. But storms like these could turn minutes into hours, or worse, cause a man to wander off the path altogether. He was watching the snow ahead, squinting, when he noticed something unusual, something moving. At first he thought it was just a trick of the storm. Shadows often danced when the wind was blowing this hard, but as he drew closer he realized the shape wasn't moving with the wind. It was stumbling. It had arms. It was a person. Caleb blinked hard, trying to clear his vision. A lone figure was walking alongside the fence, leaning heavily on it as if struggling to stay upright. The figure was thin, small in height, and bundled in clothing that looked too light for the weather. Snow covered the person's shoulders and hair. "Who in the world?" Caleb whispered to himself. He rode forward carefully, not wanting to startle the stranger. When he got close enough to see more clearly, his heart tightened a little. It was a woman, a Chinese woman from her features, shaking all over, her face pale from the cold. She lifted her head weakly as he approached, but her eyes seemed unfocused. Her lips moved, but the wind swallowed her words. Caleb jumped off his horse the moment he saw how unsteady she was. The snow reached halfway to his boots, and the wind pushed against him as if trying to keep him from reaching her. He took the last few steps quickly. "Ma'am," he said, raising his voice so she could hear him. "Are you all right? Can you hear me?" The woman tried to speak again. Her voice came out thin and small. "Please, may I sleep in your cabin, sir?" she asked with a tremble in her tone. "It's freezing outside." Her words were broken, as though each one cost her strength she barely had left. Her hands were wrapped around her thin coat, trying to hold it closed, but it was clear the coat wasn't meant for a storm like this. Snow clung to her dark hair, and her cheeks were red from the biting cold. She looked like she had been wandering for a long time. Caleb felt a sharp tug in his chest. It wasn't fear or suspicion, though most ranchers would have been wary of strangers on their land. It was concern. No one should be outside in weather like this. Even someone strong and well-prepared would struggle, and she clearly wasn't either of those things at the moment. "You're going to freeze out here," Caleb said, his voice gentle but firm. "Come on, let me help you." He reached out and supported her by the arm. She was unsteady on her feet, as if her legs had forgotten how to hold her. When she leaned slightly toward him, he realized how cold she really was. Her entire body felt chilled, and she shivered even while leaning against him. Caleb carefully helped her toward his horse. She slowed him down, but he didn't rush her. The storm had grown stronger, but keeping her safe mattered more than his own discomfort. When they reached the horse, the animal snorted and stepped nervously, sensing the tension in the air. "It's okay, boy," Caleb whispered to the horse. "We're helping someone today." He gently lifted the woman onto the horse's back. She tried to help by gripping the saddle, but her hands were stiff from the cold, and she slipped once before managing to hold herself steady. Caleb climbed up behind her and wrapped one arm around her to keep her from falling, and with the other hand he guided the reins. The woman didn't speak again. She leaned back slightly, exhausted, trusting him without question. Caleb could feel how cold she was even through his thick coat. As they started toward the cabin, the snow grew heavier. It blew sideways now, making it hard to see anything more than a few steps ahead. Caleb kept the horse close to the fence, using it as a guide. The woman's head dropped forward once, and he nudged her gently. "Stay with me," he said. "We're almost there." She didn't answer, but she straightened slightly, as though trying to follow his instruction. The ride, though short in distance, felt much longer because of the storm, and because Caleb was constantly checking to make sure she didn't slip or faint. Her breaths were shallow, her movements small. He didn't know how she had ended up out there alone, but he knew one thing: if he hadn't spotted her, she might not have survived the storm. Finally, through the thick sheet of white, a dark shape appeared: Caleb's cabin. A simple wooden structure with a porch, a chimney, and warm light glowing faintly behind the frosted windows. Relief washed over him at the sight. They reached the cabin, and Caleb quickly dismounted. He lowered the woman gently to the snow. She tried to stand, but her legs shook too much, so he supported her with both arms as he guided her to the porch steps. When he opened the door, a soft wave of warmth rolled out, heat from the fire he had left burning earlier. He helped her inside carefully. She blinked at the warm interior as if uncertain whether she was dreaming. The cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke, pine logs, and coffee. The fireplace glowed with orange and yellow flames, crackling softly. The room was humble: wooden floors, simple furniture, thick quilts folded in a corner. But right now, to someone freezing, it must have felt like a safe haven. Caleb closed the door behind them quickly to keep the storm out. Snowflakes swirled into the room before he slammed it shut. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin, everything felt calm. He helped the woman closer to the fire, guiding her toward a chair. She sat slowly, still trembling, her hands held out toward the warmth as if drawn to it. Caleb grabbed a thick blanket from a small wooden chest and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're safe now," he said with gentle reassurance. "Warm yourself by the fire." "I'll bring you some water," she nodded weakly. Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with deep relief, as if she had reached the end of a long, frightening journey. Caleb poured warm water from a kettle and handed her a cup. She held it with both hands, though her fingers trembled so much that some water spilled onto her lap. Caleb didn't say anything. He simply placed his hand near hers to steady the cup. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft and tired. "Thank you very much." Caleb offered a small, kind smile. "You don't need to thank me, ma'am. Anyone would have helped." But she looked at him with a quiet sincerity that suggested she didn't fully believe that. Perhaps she had learned that not everyone opened their door to strangers. Perhaps she had learned that kindness wasn't something to expect, but something to feel grateful for. For a moment, they simply sat in the peaceful warmth of the cabin while the storm raged outside. Snow beat against the windows and wind swept around the house, but inside, the flicker of the fire cast gentle shadows on the wooden walls. Caleb watched her regain a bit of color in her cheeks. She was still shaking lightly, but less than before. Her eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the details: his tools, his books, the simple decorations, the quiet comfort of the place. She looked tired, scared, and grateful all at once. Caleb pulled up another chair and sat near her, not too close to crowd her, but close enough so she wouldn't feel alone. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He didn't know why she had been wandering in the middle of nowhere during a dangerous storm. But those questions could wait. For now, he was simply glad he had found her in time. Caleb stayed quietly seated near the fire while the woman slowly warmed herself. The storm outside had grown so loud that the wind almost sounded like a living thing circling the house, pressing against the windows as if trying to get inside. Snow kept striking the glass in soft taps, But inside the cabin, the world felt calm, protected, and safe. The fire gave off a steady glow, sending waves of heat across the room and painting everything in shades of orange. The woman held the cup of warm water in both hands. Her fingers were red from the cold, and they trembled slightly, but she managed to drink a little at a time. Caleb noticed how carefully she moved, as though she was afraid she might break something or disturb the peace of the place. Her eyes, dark and gentle, kept drifting around the room with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. After several long minutes, her shaking began to ease. Her breathing felt slower, more steady. Finally, she glanced at Caleb, who was sitting a few feet away on a wooden chair. "You helped me," she said softly. "I would not be safe outside. I thought I might not find anyone." Caleb shook his head gently. "I'm glad you found your way to the fence line. That storm came in fast. No one should be caught out in it." She nodded, as if agreeing not only with his words but with the truth she had felt on her skin just an hour earlier. "I was very scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I could not see, everything was white. I thought maybe I was walking in circles." "That happens in storms like this," Caleb replied. "Even folks who have lived here their whole lives can get turned around." For a moment she looked down at her hands, almost as if ashamed. Then she spoke again, this time with quiet honesty. "I did not want to knock on anyone's door. I did not want to trouble people. But when I could feel my hands losing warmth, I knew I needed help." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "Asking for help isn't trouble. You did the right thing." He meant it sincerely. Years of living alone had made him notice things about people, like how some asked for help easily while others only did it as a last resort. This woman clearly fell into the second group. The way she held herself, the careful way she spoke, and the gentle manner she had shown even while freezing told him she wasn't used to relying on strangers. "What's your name?" Caleb finally asked. She looked up surprised, as if she had forgotten about introductions. "My name is Mei Lin." "That's a beautiful name," Caleb said kindly. "I'm Caleb." They exchanged small, polite smiles. Mei Lin S. was shy, uncertain, but grateful. Caleb let her drink more warm water before speaking again. "Do you know how far you walked?" She gave a slow shake of her head. "I am not sure. Our bus stopped many miles away. Something was wrong with the engine. The guide told us to wait, but I needed to use my phone. I stepped outside to look for better signal. Then the storm started. The wind pushed me away from the bus. When I looked back, I could not see it." "That must have been frightening," Caleb said gently. "Yes," she whispered. "I kept thinking I would see the bus again, but the snow made everything look the same. I kept walking and walking. I did not know where I was going. I only knew I could not stop moving or I would get too cold." Caleb listened quietly. Her story made him feel a weight in his chest. Not sadness exactly, but a deep sympathy. He pictured her struggling through the snow with no idea which direction was safe. It made him grateful that he had taken the fence route home instead of the shorter path. If he hadn't, he might not have found her. "You're safe now," he reminded her gently. "The storm will pass soon enough." Mei Lin nodded again, but kept her eyes on the fire. The flames reflected in them, making them seem warmer and softer. Caleb stood and walked to the kitchen counter. "Are you hungry? I can make something warm, soup maybe." Mei Lin looked startled by the offer. She sat up straighter. "I do not want to trouble you more. You have helped me already." "It's no trouble," Caleb said. "You've had a rough day. A warm meal might help." She hesitated, then nodded with a small, grateful smile. "Thank you." Caleb started preparing soup with practiced movements. Living alone meant cooking simple meals was a routine part of his days. The smell of vegetables warming in the pot soon filled the little cabin, adding another layer of comfort to the atmosphere. Mei Lin watched him quietly, but she didn't appear nervous. Instead, she seemed almost relieved to have something ordinary and peaceful happening in front of her. Occasionally, she rubbed her hands together under the blanket, as if trying to wake the last bits of warmth into them. Caleb returned to her with a hot bowl of soup. Mei Lin accepted it carefully and took a small sip. Her shoulders relaxed a little and a soft breath escaped her lips. "This is very good," she said. "I'm glad," he replied with a small smile. They stayed quiet for a few minutes while she ate. The storm outside continued, but the sound now felt far away, almost like a reminder of the danger she had escaped. Every spoonful brought more warmth into her body. Her posture slowly straightened, and some color returned to her face. When she finished, Caleb took the bowl and set it aside. He sat again, but this time he moved his chair a little closer, wanting her to feel comfortable enough to talk. "You must not be from around here," he said. Mei Lin nodded. "I came from China 2 years ago." "What brought you all the way out here?" he asked gently. She glanced toward the window as if searching for the right words in the falling snow. "Work mostly, and trying to make life better for my family." Caleb nodded, understanding that feeling far too well. "That's a brave thing to do, moving so far from home." "It was harder than I imagined," she admitted. "Sometimes I feel very alone here. Everything is new, everything is different, and I miss my parents, my sister, my friends, but I tell myself I must stay strong." Her voice shook slightly at that last sentence, not from cold, but from emotion. Caleb didn't interrupt. He waited, giving her the space to continue if she wished. "I joined a small tour group because I wanted to see more of the country," she said softly. "I work a lot. I wanted to feel like I am living life too, not only working." "That makes sense," Caleb said. "Everyone needs time to breathe." Her face softened with appreciation. "Yes, but I didn't expect a storm. I thought the weather would stay calm." Caleb gave a small laugh, gentle, not mocking. "Weather here changes faster than most folks expect, but you're lucky you headed toward the fence. If you had gone the other way, you might have walked for hours and never seen anything." "I followed the fence because it felt like something solid," she explained. "Something that would not disappear in the snow." "That was smart," Caleb said sincerely. "Very smart." Mei Lin's eyes brightened a little. It was clear she wasn't used to hearing praise for her instincts or choices. She held onto the blanket a little tighter, as though comforted by his kind tone. The fire crackled softly, warm and steady. The cabin was small, but in that moment it felt like the coziest place in the world. Mei Lin looked around again, calmer this time. "This place feels peaceful," she said. Caleb nodded. "It's quiet out here, but I like it. Not many visitors, though." "I am sorry to come unexpectedly," she replied quickly. "You don't need to apologize," Caleb said. "I'm glad you knocked, or almost knocked." A soft smile touched her lips. "I was planning to, I just didn't know if someone would answer." "I would have answered," Caleb said with certainty, "especially in weather like this." They shared a small moment of understanding. It was simple, but it felt important. A stranger had found shelter, and a lonely man had found someone to talk to. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the fire anymore. It came from two people who had crossed paths by chance but found comfort in each other's presence. After another long pause, Mei Lin spoke again, her voice quieter. "I was afraid when I first saw you on the horse. The storm made everything look strange, but I was more afraid of the cold. I thought maybe you would ignore me or not believe I needed help." Caleb's brows lifted slightly. "Why would I ignore someone in trouble?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. "Sometimes people look away. Sometimes they don't want to be involved. Back home, my mother always said that when you need help the most, you will learn who truly cares. I did not know you, but you stopped anyway." He met her eyes gently. "Sometimes helping someone is the easiest choice a person can make. I'm no hero. I just did what felt right." Her smile deepened, small but true. "Still, thank you." Caleb felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. It had been a long time since anyone had sat across from him and spoken with such sincerity. Even longer since anyone had trusted him enough to share honest fears. He stood and added more wood to the fire, watching the flames climb higher. When he turned back, he noticed Mei Lin's eyes drooping slightly. She looked exhausted, as if the last of her strength was slowly slipping away now that she was safe. "You can rest if you want," Caleb said gently. "The couch is comfortable and I have extra blankets." Mei Lin blinked slowly. "Are you sure I do not want to take your place?" "You won't," he assured her. "I'll be fine." She nodded, too tired to protest further. Caleb helped her stand and she walked toward the couch, still wrapped in the blanket. She lay down gently, curling up like someone who hadn't felt real warmth in hours. Caleb tucked another quilt around her. "Try to sleep," he said softly. "You're safe here." Her eyes slowly closed. She looked peaceful for the first time since he found her. Caleb watched her for a few seconds, then returned to his chair near the fire. As the storm continued outside, the cabin felt calm, quiet, almost like two worlds separated by a single wooden door, one wild and cold, the other warm and full of gentle human presence. Caleb leaned back, listening to the soft crackle of the fire and the quiet breathing of Mei Lin. He didn't know what the next day would bring. He didn't know how long she would stay or when her group would find her. But for now, he simply felt grateful that he had opened his door when someone needed it most. The next morning arrived quietly. The storm that had shaken the cabin all night had finally calmed. When sunlight slipped through the window, it glowed softly against the wooden floor, warming the room in a gentle golden color. The storm had left behind a thick blanket of snow outside, but inside the cabin everything felt still and peaceful. Caleb was already awake. Years of living on a ranch had taught him to rise early, even when the world outside tried to sleep under winter's white cover. He sat by the fireplace, adding a new log to keep the flames steady. The cabin smelled of warm wood, a little smoke, and the faint scent of breakfast cooking on the stove. He looked toward the couch where Mei Lin slept. She was curled under the blanket, her face calm and relaxed. Gone was the fear and exhaustion she carried last night. Her breathing was soft and even. Caleb didn't want to wake her, not after what she'd been through. She needed rest more than anything. But after a while, Mei Lin stirred. Her eyes moved slowly under her eyelids before gently opening. She blinked a few times, confused at first, as if needing a moment to remember where she was. Then she lifted her head slightly and saw Caleb sitting nearby. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Mei Lin sat up slowly, pulling the blanket closer around her shoulders. "Good morning," she replied with a shy smile. Her voice sounded rested but still carried a little tiredness. "I am sorry I slept so long." "You needed it," Caleb assured her. "How are you feeling?" "A little sore," she admitted, touching her arms. "But warm, much better than yesterday." "That's what matters," Caleb said as he stood and grabbed the kettle. "Would you like some tea? I made some earlier." Her eyes brightened lightly, as if surprised by such thoughtfulness. "Yes, thank you." Caleb poured her a cup and handed it to her. Mei Lin held it carefully, letting the heat warm her hands. She looked around the cabin again, this time with a clearer mind. The place seemed even more comforting in the morning light. "I have never seen so much snow," she said quietly. "Where I lived in China, winter is cold, but not like this." Caleb smiled. "Winter here has a strong personality, sometimes friendly, sometimes wild. Yesterday was one of the wild days." She nodded and took a sip of tea. "I think I learned that. I will respect Wyoming winter from now on." Her small joke made Caleb chuckle gently. It was a soft sound, but genuine. He realized it had been a long time since he had shared morning tea with someone or exchanged simple, comfortable conversation. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I made breakfast. It's simple, but it will fill you." "You have done so much for me already," she said, lowering her head slightly. "I feel like I should help." "You can help by eating," Caleb replied with warmth. "And by telling me your story when you feel ready." She looked up, thoughtful. After a moment of quiet, she nodded. "I can do that." Caleb served her a hot breakfast, eggs, toast, and a few slices of fruit he had stored away. Mei Lin accepted it carefully, as though the meal itself was an act of kindness she didn't deserve. Caleb noticed her gentle manners, the way she held the fork lightly and ate with slow appreciation. They sat at the small wooden table near the window. Snow outside sparkled under the new sunlight, spreading across the land like a giant white blanket. It was beautiful in a calm, quiet kind of way. Mei Lin took a few more bites of her meal before she finally spoke. "You asked about my story. It is not very special." "Every story is special," Caleb said softly, "especially when it belongs to someone sitting at my table." Her face warmed with a shy smile. "All right, I will try." She placed her fork down carefully and folded her hands. Her gaze dropped to the table for a moment before she looked up again. "I grew up in a small village," she began. "My parents worked very hard. They always tried to give me and my sister everything they could, but life was not easy. We did not have much money, so when I was old enough, I worked too, cooking, cleaning, sometimes helping in nearby fields." Caleb listened with quiet interest. Her voice held a softness that made him want to lean closer. "I had dreams," she continued. "I wanted to travel, to learn new things, to see new places, but dreams cost money, and we did not have enough. So when I finally had a chance to go to America for work, I felt it was my best chance. I sent money home whenever I could." "That's a big step to take alone," Caleb said gently. "Yes," she whispered. "Some days I feel strong, other days not so strong." Caleb nodded knowingly. "Everyone feels that way sometimes." She looked up, her eyes softening with understanding. "Even you." He smiled with a hint of sadness. "Especially me." She watched him quietly, giving him space to speak if he chose. Caleb took a deep breath. I wasn't always alone here. My wife Emma and I lived on this ranch together. She loved it here. Loved the horses, the open sky, the quiet. He paused for a moment, the memory soft but emotional. But she got sick a few years ago, and this old cabin has felt very different since then. Mei Lin lowered her eyes respectfully. I am sorry, she said softly. Losing someone like that must hurt very deeply. It does, Caleb answered, not hiding the truth. But life keeps moving whether we want it to or not. For a few moments they sat in thoughtful silence. The only sound was the gentle crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of the winter wind. Mei Lin eventually spoke again. I think we are both trying to be strong in our own ways. Caleb looked at her, surprised by how true her words felt. Yes, I think you're right. She studied him with quiet curiosity. You seem like someone who carries many stories and much kindness. Caleb felt a gentle heat rise in his cheeks, unexpected and unfamiliar. He shook his head lightly. I just try to do the right thing, that's all. But not everyone does that, she said softly. Some people turn away when things feel complicated. You didn't. Her gratitude was sincere, and it filled the room with a warm feeling that made Caleb sit a little straighter. Mei Lin took another sip of tea before continuing her story. When I joined the tour group, I wanted to feel free for a little while. I wanted to enjoy something new. But when the bus broke, everyone started to panic. I stepped out to find a better phone signal. And then the storm covered the whole world. It felt like someone erased the road and sky. That's exactly what storms here do, Caleb said. They erase everything for a while, she nodded. I kept walking. I kept telling myself to stay calm, but my legs felt heavier. And my thoughts became confusing. I wondered if I would ever find someone. But you did, Caleb said in a soft tone. Yes, she whispered. I found you. The words hung between them, simple, honest, and somehow more meaningful than she realized. Caleb cleared his throat slightly, feeling a warmth in his chest that hadn't been there in a long time. I'm glad you did. Mei Lin smiled again, small but deeply genuine. After breakfast, Caleb showed her where she could wash up. When she returned, she seemed more refreshed, more awake. She sat by the fire while Caleb cleaned the dishes. The cabin was quiet in a peaceful, companionable way. After a while, Mei Lin spoke again. You must feel lonely sometimes, living here all by yourself. Caleb paused, then nodded. I do, but the quiet also helps me think, helps me breathe. I understand, she said gently. Silence can feel safe, but it can also feel heavy. That's true, he admitted. She hesitated, then added, Thank you for sharing your story with me. I know it is not easy to speak about someone you loved. Caleb offered a soft smile. Thank you for listening. The day passed slowly, comfortably. Mei Lin helped tidy the cabin even though Caleb insisted she didn't have to. She folded blankets, helped wash dishes, and talked a little more about her life. Caleb found himself enjoying the sound of her voice, calm, gentle, thoughtful. They sat by the window for a while, watching the snow sparkle under the afternoon sun. Mei Lin spoke about her sister, her favorite foods, the festivals she missed back home. Caleb told her about ranch life, the animals, the seasons, and how he spent his days. It felt peaceful, natural, like two people who simply understood each other without trying too hard. As the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow across the snow, Mei Lin looked toward Caleb with quiet sincerity. Yesterday, I was so afraid. I did not know if I would see another sunrise. Now I feel safe, truly safe. Caleb looked at her gently. I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad I could help. She lowered her eyes shyly, but a soft smile touched her lips. I feel like meeting you had a reason. Caleb didn't know what to say to that. But he felt something shift inside him. Something warm, something hopeful, something he had not felt in a long, long time. The storm had brought her to his door. But the quiet moments, the shared stories, and the simple kindness between them were what truly warmed the cabin that day. And neither of them realized yet that their meeting had only just begun. The next morning arrived with a gentle quietness that felt almost unreal after the wild storm of the day before. When Caleb opened his eyes, he noticed the soft golden light spreading across the wooden ceiling and the faint sound of wind blowing calmly outside. For a moment, it felt like the world had finally taken a long, peaceful breath. Caleb stood and stretched, his joints stiff from the cold. He walked to the window, wiped away some frost, and looked outside. The land was covered in smooth, untouched snow that stretched all the way to the distant hills. The sky was clear, bright blue, and sunlight scattered across the snow like tiny crystals. It looked peaceful, too peaceful. Then he saw it, a broken line in the snow near the far end of the pasture. The fence. Something wasn't right. His eyes narrowed as he leaned closer to the window. One section of the fence had collapsed under the weight of the storm, and beyond the broken part, he couldn't see the cattle that usually wandered near that area in the mornings. A heavy feeling settled in his chest. Animals could wander far once the fence was down, especially after being frightened by the storm. It could take hours, maybe the whole day, to find them. He turned away from the window and noticed movement near the couch. Mei Lin was awake, sitting up under the blanket with sleepy eyes. Her hair was slightly messy from sleep, and she blinked slowly, adjusting to the morning light. "Good morning," she said softly, giving him a shy smile. "Morning," Caleb replied, trying to return her smile even though worry was now eating at the back of his mind. She noticed something in his face immediately. "Is something wrong?" Caleb hesitated before speaking. He didn't want to worry her, especially after the difficult day she had survived, but he also didn't believe in hiding things. "The storm broke part of the fence," he said finally. "Some of the cattle might have wandered off." Mei Lin pulled the blanket closer around herself. "Is that very bad?" "It can be," Caleb answered honestly. "Animals can roam far when the fence is open. They follow their instincts, and sometimes those instincts lead them into places that aren't safe." She nodded slowly, trying to understand the seriousness of it. "Will you have to look for them?" "Yes," Caleb said, "as soon as possible before they wander too far." He moved toward the door, grabbing his coat from the hook. He didn't want to leave her alone, but he didn't have much choice. Still, before he could slip his arm into the coat's sleeve, Mei Lin stood up. "I want to come with you," she said. Caleb froze in place, turning to face her fully. "You need to rest. Yesterday was hard on you." "I feel stronger today," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I want to help," Caleb shook his head. "The snow is deep, the walk will be long, it will be tiring." "I grew up helping on farms, too," she reminded him with a small smile. "We worked in rain, heat, and sometimes snow. I know how to walk carefully. I know how to follow animal tracks, and I do not want you to go alone." The last part touched him more than he expected. He studied her for a long moment. Her posture was steady, her eyes certain. And beneath that certainty was something else: gratitude, connection, and the simple desire to stand beside the person who had helped her. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but stay close to me, and if the cold bothers you, you tell me right away." "I promise," she said. Caleb found an extra coat and scarf for her. Though slightly big on her, she wrapped them tightly around herself, looking both determined and endearing. Once they were ready, they stepped outside. The cold air hit instantly, sharp but clean, filling their lungs with a crisp freshness. The snow squeaked under their boots as they walked. The world was bright, almost too bright with the sunshine reflecting off the white surface, but it felt calm, not threatening like the previous day. Caleb led the way and Mei Lin followed closely. The ranch looked peaceful, but Caleb knew the silence could be misleading. Animals could be anywhere, stuck, wandering, or hiding from the cold. When they reached the broken fence, Caleb knelt to inspect the tracks in the snow. Several clearly belonged to cattle. They led toward a cluster of trees farther down the pasture. "They went this way," Caleb said, pointing. Mei Lin knelt beside him, examining the prints with surprising attention. "This one looks fresh," she said, pointing to one set of tracks. "The edges are still sharp." Caleb looked at her with a bit of admiration. "You've got a good eye." She smiled a little, pleased that she could help. They followed the trail, walking slowly but steadily through the deep snow. At times, Mei Lin's steps sank lower than she expected, and she almost lost her balance. Each time, Caleb reached out instinctively to steady her. Each time, she thanked him quietly, and they continued. They walked in silence for a while, not because conversation felt awkward, but because the peacefulness of the snowy landscape made talking unnecessary. Their breaths formed soft clouds in the air, floating upward like little ghosts that disappeared in seconds. After nearly an hour of walking, they found the first few cattle gathered near a cluster of tall pine trees. The animals were calm, eating snow and staying close together as if protecting each other from the storm they had survived. Caleb let out a relieved sigh. "There they are," Mei Lin smiled warmly. "They look safe." "Most of them, yes," Caleb said, scanning the area carefully. But then he frowned. "A few are still missing." "How do you know?" Mei Lin asked gently. "I know my herd," he answered. "There should be at least 4 more nearby." Mei Lin looked around, eyes searching the snowy land. "Maybe they went farther." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Let's look around." They walked past the cluster of trees and down a small slope toward a more open area. The sunlight glowed across the snow, making the land look almost magical. But the tracks became harder to follow. The wind from the storm had wiped away many signs. After walking for several minutes, they heard a soft sound, a distant, low noise carried by the wind. Caleb stopped and lifted his head. "Did you hear that?" Mei Lin nodded. "Yes, it sounds like one of them." They followed the sound up a gentle hill, and at the top, they found 3 cattle huddled near a small frozen stream. They looked a little frightened but unharmed. Caleb approached them slowly, speaking in a calm voice. Animals trusted him. They knew his scent and his tone. Mei Lin stayed back a few steps, letting him guide them. "They are all safe," she said, her voice carrying a sense of relief. "3 of them, yes," Caleb said, "but one is still missing." "There is one more?" Mei Lin asked. "Yes," Caleb said, scanning the horizon. "He's smaller than the others. He gets nervous easily. I hope he didn't wander too far." "Let's keep looking," she said with gentle determination. Caleb felt something warm in his chest. She didn't complain. She didn't say she was tired. She didn't suggest giving up. Instead, she walked beside him, showing the kind of quiet bravery he respected deeply. As they walked farther, the land changed slightly. A few bushes poked out of the snow, and some parts of the field were uneven from the storm's heavy wind. Then Mei Lin stopped. "Caleb," she said softly. He turned quickly. Her eyes were fixed on something ahead. When he followed her gaze, he saw a small, faint indentation in the snow not far away, a track. It was lighter than the others, but shaped the same. "That's him," Caleb said, relief washing over him. "He's close." They followed the track carefully, moving slowly so they wouldn't miss any sign. After a short walk, they found the last missing animal standing near a fallen tree. It looked a little confused but unharmed. Caleb approached gently and guided him toward the others. "That's the last of them," Caleb said with a deep exhale. Mei Lin smiled widely, her eyes bright. "We found them all." "Yes," he said softly, "we did." There was a moment when they simply stood in the quietness of the snowy land, watching the animals. Caleb turned to Mei Lin. "You helped more than you know," he said. "I don't think I could have covered this much ground alone." Her cheeks pinkened with warmth, not from the cold but from the compliment. "I just wanted to help. You gave me shelter when I needed it. Helping you feels right." Caleb felt something warm rise in his chest, something gentle and deep. He didn't say anything right away. He simply watched her, realizing how natural it felt having her by his side. As they began walking the cattle back toward the ranch, the sun shone warmly over the snow, and a quiet joy settled over both of them. The world felt peaceful again, and the fear of the storm seemed far away. At one point, Mei Lin stumbled slightly on the uneven snow, and Caleb instinctively reached out, catching her arm before she fell. She steadied herself, then looked up at him with a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "Always," Caleb replied without thinking. She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and something unspoken passed between them, something gentle, something warm. Together they continued guiding the cattle home, side by side, their footsteps leaving a trail through the bright white snow. Neither of them needed to say anything more. The peacefulness of the moment said enough. It was the kind of day neither of them would forget. The morning after they brought the cattle home was clear and bright, with a soft sunlight that made the snow look like silver powder scattered across the land. The ranch seemed calm, almost peaceful enough to forget that only 2 days earlier a harsh storm had covered everything in danger and fear. Inside the cabin, the air felt warm with the gentle scent of breakfast cooking on the stove. Caleb moved quietly as he made the morning meal. He didn't want to wake Mei Lin too quickly. She had worked hard yesterday, walking through deep snow and helping him find the missing animals. He had expected her to get tired halfway through the search, but instead she had shown a level of strength and patience that truly impressed him. She had stayed beside him without complaining once. He admired that about her, deeply. As Caleb stirred the eggs in the pan, he glanced toward the couch. Mei Lin was sitting up, wrapped in a blanket, her legs tucked beneath her and her dark hair falling softly over her shoulders. She looked peaceful, almost glowing in the quiet morning light. "Good morning," he said with a gentle smile. "Good morning," she replied in her soft voice. Her eyes looked clearer today, more rested and filled with gratitude. "It smells delicious." "You must be hungry after yesterday," he said. "I am," she admitted, laughing lightly. "I think I used muscles I haven't used in a long time," Caleb chuckled. Walking through snow can feel like walking through sand, only colder. Mei Lin nodded, smiling warmly. But I'm happy I could help. You did more than help, Caleb said. I couldn't have found all the cattle so quickly on my own. She lowered her eyes shyly at the compliment. I was glad to help, she repeated softly. You helped me first. Caleb served breakfast, and they ate together at the small wooden table near the window. The snow outside shone brightly under the sun, and the peaceful silence felt gentle, almost comforting. They talked a little about their plans for the day, though neither of them knew exactly what would happen next. Mei Lin looked thoughtful after a few bites of food. She touched the edge of her cup carefully and took a slow breath. I wonder if my tour group is looking for me, she said quietly. I'm sure they are, Caleb replied. The sheriff will probably come by today or tomorrow. Storms slow down searches, but once the road's clear, they'll be out looking. She nodded, though her expression held something deeper, something a little sad, a little unsure. Do you want to go back to them? Caleb asked gently, her eyes lifted to meet his. I should, she said. But I feel strange. How so? Mei Lin hesitated, gathering her thoughts carefully. The world feels different now. I almost feel like that storm brought me to a place I was meant to find. Caleb remained quiet, listening closely. This cabin, she continued softly, your kindness, the peaceful land, I had never felt this type of safety since I came to America. Yesterday, when we walked in the snow, I felt like I was not alone, not just physically, but here. She gently touched her chest. My heart felt calmer. Caleb felt a warm ache inside him at her words. He wasn't used to someone expressing such sincere emotion toward him. He had been living so long in silence that he sometimes forgot what it felt like to hear a gentle, honest voice speaking from the heart. I'm glad you felt that way, he said quietly. Mei Lin smiled softly. I did. They finished breakfast slowly, enjoying the warmth and calmness of the moment. But before they could clean the dishes, a sound broke the stillness, a distant rumbling noise coming from outside. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to catch their attention. Caleb stood and moved to the window. He wiped the fog from the glass and leaned forward. A small vehicle was approaching the ranch. It looked like one of the sheriff's trucks. They're here, Caleb said gently. Mei Lin stood from the table, pulling the blanket around her shoulders as she walked toward him. She looked outside as well, her expression a mixture of relief and sadness. I knew this moment would come, she whispered. Caleb nodded. It was only a matter of time. They both stepped outside just as the truck came to a stop near the barn. The sheriff climbed out of the driver's seat, his boots crunching through the snow. He waved at Caleb with a friendly smile. Mornin', Caleb, the sheriff called. Heard from town that a member of a tour group went missing during the storm. Folks said she might have wandered in this direction. Caleb stepped forward slightly and nodded. She did. She's here. I brought her in last night. The sheriff looked relieved. Good to hear. The group has been searching all over since the storm cleared. They've been worried sick. Behind him, a second door opened, and one of the tour guides stepped out, bundled in a heavy coat. His face lit up when he saw Mei Lin. There you are, he said, walking quickly toward her. We've been searching everywhere. We were afraid you might be hurt. Mei Lin gave a small bow of apology. I am sorry. The storm came fast. I got lost. The guide nodded eagerly. It's not your fault. We just wanted to make sure you were safe. As the guide spoke, Caleb stepped back a little, giving Mei Lin space. He watched her as she listened politely, nodding at everything the tour guide said. She was grateful, of course. Anyone would be when found after being lost in a storm. But there was something in her eyes when she looked back toward Caleb. Something warm, something uncertain, something that didn't want to leave too quickly. The sheriff looked between the two of them and smiled kindly. You're lucky Caleb found you. Not many people ride out in storms like that. Mei Lin turned to Caleb with a soft, heartfelt expression. I am lucky, she said quietly. Caleb felt something inside him tighten gently, not painfully but emotionally. The thought of her leaving made him feel strangely empty, as if the cabin would go back to being too quiet again. The tour guide cleared his throat. We should head back soon. The rest of the group is waiting. The bus is still being repaired, but we have shelter in town. Mei Lin nodded slowly, but her eyes drifted to Caleb again. May I say goodbye? She asked the guide. Of course, he said, stepping back toward the truck. Mei Lin turned fully toward Caleb then. Snowflakes drifted gently around them, and the world seemed to quiet down again, as if giving them a private moment. Thank you, she said softly. For everything, for saving me, for sharing your home, for being kind. You don't need to thank me, Caleb said, though his voice was softer than usual. I'm glad you're safe, truly. She stepped a little closer, her eyes shining not with tears but with warmth. These last 2 days, I will remember them for the rest of my life. Caleb swallowed gently. I will too. She took a deep breath. I don't really want to leave, but I know I should, he nodded slowly. I know. She hesitated, then asked quietly, if I wrote to you, would you write back? Caleb felt something warm move through him, something like hope. Yes, he said. I'd like that very much. Her smile grew, small but real. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a tiny notebook. She bent her head, writing something on a piece of paper carefully. Then she tore the page out and handed it to him. It was her name and an address. Her handwriting was neat, gentle, almost delicate. I hope you will use it, she said softly. I will, he answered. The guide called out gently from the truck. We should go now. Mei Lin nodded, then looked back at Caleb one last time. She took a step forward and gave him a soft, warm hug. He felt her small hands gently rest against his coat. The hug was brief but full of sincerity and gratitude. Goodbye, Caleb, she whispered. Goodbye, Mei Lin, he replied gently. She stepped back slowly, then walked toward the truck. She turned once more before getting inside, offering a final warm smile. Caleb lifted a hand in a small wave. She waved back before closing the door. The truck drove away slowly, its tires crunching through the snow. Caleb watched until it disappeared down the long white road. The ranch grew quiet again, too quiet. He walked back inside the cabin. Everything looked the same as always, the wooden table, the fire, the quilt on the couch. But something felt different now. The silence felt heavier, yet somehow warmer too, as if her presence still lingered gently in the quiet corners of the room. Caleb sat by the fire with the small note in his hand. He looked at her handwriting and felt a soft smile touch his lips. A few days later, he received a letter. It was from Mei Lin. She thanked him again, described her safe return to the group, and wrote that she hoped to visit him one day. Her words were warm, thoughtful, and filled with quiet meaning. Caleb placed the letter carefully in a wooden box where he kept things he treasured most. Outside, the snow continued to fall lightly, and the cabin glowed with soft firelight. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something growing inside him, hope quiet and steady like a small flame in winter. Maybe the storm had brought more than danger. Maybe it had brought a beginning. And as he looked out across the snowy land, he found himself smiling, wondering if someday, when the weather was calm again, Mei Lin might return, not as a lost traveler, but as someone who had found a quiet place in her heart she wanted to visit once more.